Open up to the book of Daniel. So I entitled today's message, The Man Behind the Curtain. What imagery comes to your mind when I say the man behind the curtain?
The Wizard of Oz.
The Wizard of Oz. That is where it comes from. He says, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. How many of us don't pay attention to the man behind the curtain? We don't usually look for the hand of God in things, do we? Maybe you do, but so many people don't. So many people pay no attention to the man behind the curtain today. And as we study Daniel, as you open up to the book of Daniel, I want to suggest to you, as we study Daniel, the theme of Daniel that I want to really impress upon you as we start doing Daniel is the man behind the curtain. As we study Daniel, you're going to see over and over and over and over and over and over again phrases like God gave, God allowed, God did, God bestowed, God gave. You're going to see them over and over again, and you're hardly not even going to see them or notice them or pay attention to them, but they are everywhere in the book of Daniel. And as we go through it, I just want you to keep in your mind the man behind the curtain who is really pulling the strings in life. Is it you? Is it the president? Is it the king in Daniel's day? Who is it that's really behind the scenes pulling the strings in life? Who is it? So keep in mind the man behind the curtain. When Christian Hertner, the governor of Massachusetts, had been running hard for a second term in his office, he had one day, after a busy morning of chasing votes and no lunch, he arrived at a church barbecue. It was late afternoon, and he was starving. And as he moved down the serving line, he held out his plate to the woman serving the chicken. She put a piece on his plate and turned to the next person in line. "Excuse me," the governor said, "do you mind if I have another piece of chicken?" "Sorry," the woman told him, "I'm supposed to give one piece of chicken to each person." "But I'm starving," the governor said. "Sorry," the woman said, "only one to a customer." Governor Hertner was a modest and unassuming man, but he decided at this time he would throw a little bit of his weight around. "Do you know who I am?" he said. "I am the governor of this state." "Do you know who I am?" the woman said. "I'm the lady in charge of the chicken. Move along." You ever wonder who's really in control? Who is in control? Today, God wants you to understand the book of Daniel, and we're going to see just who's really in control. So as we study the book of Daniel, there's three ideas that we're going to come to grips with, and this is the same outline that I have for every single introductory message I've ever done in 15 years. So you should know exactly what it is, because we've done it several times by now. The first idea we're going to look at is the place of the book. What is the place of the book? Where does the book fit into the grand scheme of things? Second idea, the purpose of the book. What does it all mean? What's in there? And finally, the theology of the book. What can we learn about God as a result of studying this book? So this is just an overview, introductory message. This is imagine yourself at 35,000 feet on an airplane. Everything we look at is going to be really small, very quick, and boom, we're going to be done. All right? It's just to give you a little glimpse to help you open up your Bible, because I suspect some of us didn't look at Daniel this last week, even though we knew it was coming, right, Eleanor? We knew it was coming. So I just want you to open it up, get a little familiar with it, get the pages ready to go, dovetail the top or something, whatever you got to do, because we're going to be camping in Daniel here for a few weeks. So, the place of the book. One of the things we have to understand as we study anything from the Bible is we have to know who the author of the book is. It really helps to know who the author is. So, the author of the book is Daniel. Boy, see, you guys think it's tough to be theologians, don't you? This isn't tough at all. The prophet Daniel, his name means God is my judge. And Jesus gives credibility to Daniel being a prophet in Matthew chapter 24 in verse 15. Even though the Old Testament collection of books, you know how, so in our nice English Bibles, we have everything broken up nice. We've got, the history books, the Pentateuch, and then we've got wisdom literature, and then we've got the prophetical books, and we have it all broken down nice in our Western way of thinking. The Jews, when they had their collection, they did not put Daniel with the prophets, and we're like, what? They didn't put Daniel with the prophets. I know. Well, Jesus calls him a prophet. And you know what? That's good enough for me. He's in the prophets. Daniel is a contemporary of a couple of other prophets. And if you were in Sunday school class this morning, you would know exactly who those other two prophets are. Does anybody want to chime in? Who are the other two prophets that Daniel is a contemporary of? Anybody? Going once? Jeremiah and? Starts with an E. Ezekiel. So as you look at the prophets, if you looked at the table of contents of your Bible and you saw the prophets, you start with Isaiah and there's all these prophets, right? Well, these three guys, Daniel, Ezekiel, and Jeremiah, they were all at the same time, all right? So they knew each other, and in fact, we're going to get ideas and glimpses in Daniel that he knew about the writings of Jeremiah. Isn't that cool? So we're going to look at that when we get into chapter 9. So that's not going to be for a little while. You may just as well forget about that by that time. I mean, that's like 9 weeks from now or something. But anyway, if you write notes, you might want to write that down. Daniel chapter 9, he's going to reference prophecies from the book of Jeremiah. So that's cool. But they all lived around the same time, around the 6th century BC. Specifically, Daniel is written or starts to be, received or thought through at about 605, which is when King Nebuchadnezzar is besieging Jerusalem at one of the times that he's besieging Jerusalem. He besieges it 3 different times. But anyway, Jeremiah is in the southern kingdom. Again, if you were in Sunday school class, this is making a lot more sense now, isn't it, gals, right? If I say the southern kingdom, the southern kingdom. You got to be in Sunday school, guys. I'm telling you, I'm just plugging it and plugging it and plugging it. Because if you were in Sunday school and if you weren't in Sunday school, I can tell who is in Sunday school and who's not in Sunday school when I say the southern kingdoms. Please be in Sunday school. It would help a great deal. Jeremiah is in the southern kingdom. At the time, it is being besieged. Ezekiel is prophesying to the exiles in Babylon after the southern kingdom is destroyed. Daniel, in the meantime, is in the court of the king of Babylon. And where's Jeremiah? I said that he's a contemporary too. So you have Ezekiel, he's being taken away into Babylon, and he's just kind of with the folk of Babylon. Daniel is in the court of the king in the capital of Babylon. And Jeremiah, the third of 3, he is still in Jerusalem at the time of the destruction of that southern kingdom and Jerusalem. So, and when we first meet this man, Daniel, in the first chapter, it is clear that he's a young man. Now, many scholars think that he's probably around 16-ish years old, maybe 14, maybe 17, but he's that age, all right? He's a young man. He is of noble birth. We don't know how of noble birth, but it just says that he's of noble birth. He's physically attractive and mentally sharp. Imagine a younger version of me. That was all right. I'll take that. By the end of the book, he is somewhere close to about 90 years old. So he's doing his thing for a long time. During all of those years, so from like about 16 or so to the age of 90, Daniel will witness the rise and fall of many empires and kingdoms such as Babylon and Persia. He's a prominent leader in many of these kingdoms, and we'll look at all of those things as we study the book of Daniel. Now, the audience. After last week, we should all know the type of audience that Daniel is writing to. Most of the Old Testament has a very Jewish nature for the audience, and Daniel is really no exception. Daniel does have some of the exceptions a little bit, but we will get into all of those things as we read them, as we go through Daniel. There are some interesting parts of Daniel as we think about the audience of Daniel. For example, in Daniel, well, let me ask you this question. What is the Old Testament written in? What's the original language of the Old Testament? Hebrew. Very good. They still speak Hebrew in Israel to this day. I mean, it's a very old language. Did you know that in Daniel, there's a small portion of Daniel that's not written in Hebrew. It's written in Aramaic. And you may be asking yourself, why would some of Daniel be written in Aramaic? So the first chapter and some verses is Hebrew, and then we have about 6 or so chapters of Aramaic, and then we go back to Hebrew for the end. What is that all about? Why would God allow for that, and what's going on there? We will get to that as we get into chapter 2 and where that begins, and why would Daniel decide to use Aramaic as he's writing instead of what he's very familiar with, which is Hebrew. But it does show that he's bilingual, at least in Aramaic and Hebrew. So he's a very smart man. And some of the book is clearly futuristic and prophetic. You could almost say that Daniel is kind of like the revelation, quote unquote, of the Old Testament with all of the prophecies and futuristic things that he's going to be addressing. Some is prophetic to the time of Daniel, and some of it is still prophetic to us even today. Can you believe that? Some of the stuff that Daniel wrote at that time in the 6th century BC or so is still future for us today. However, some of what he wrote was future for his time and has already been fulfilled. Some of that's chapter 11, chapter 10. We will talk about those things when we get to those things. And those are some very exciting things to study as we get to those parts. The audience to those parts could be different people groups who may be living at the time of the fulfillment of that prophecy. Some of our job in understanding Daniel is to sort some of those things out. So if you're not a Greek and he's prophesying about the Greek Empire, well, who's Daniel's audience for those parts? Not you, So we will get to those things as we think about the audience, to whom is he writing, why is he writing these things, and those sorts of things. So now the age of this book. How old is this book? I've mentioned some dates, but let's get into some of the nuts and bolts of this. And this is where, if you were in Sunday school class, you probably only need maybe a 3-point harness. Otherwise, you're going to need at least a 5-point and a helmet, all right? Buckle up, crack your knuckles, whatever you got to do, all right? Because this is where it's going to get kind of technical, but we have to understand what is the age, what's going on, what is the setting like for Daniel. It's so important for us to understand what is going on here. And so in understanding Daniel, we have to see why Daniel's with the Babylonians. I've mentioned Babylon, the Babylonians. Remember, as we read in 2 Kings, we talked about King Nebuchadnezzar, who was perhaps the greatest king of the Babylonians. What does he have to do with anything? Why is he with this time of Daniel? Okay, so between the years of 612 and 605 BC, the major powers of the world are at war. These players are Assyria, Egypt, and Babylon. And if you want to throw Israel in there, just because, it's hard to not talk about theological stuff and not bring in Israel. Okay, where's Israel at? Israel's with Egypt. Kind of like a puppet state. I don't know how political or diplomatic you are, but they're a puppet state. They're just doing what they're told. They're not powerful by any means. They're just doing what they're told. They're just kind of there. Okay, so at the time of those three, Assyria, Egypt, and Babylon, the major powerhouse is Assyria. Almost 150 years previous to this, the Assyrians had conquered the 10 northern tribes of Israel. But by 600 BC, the time of the Assyrians is running out, and Babylon is set to take the number 1 spot. So how do they do it? In 609 BC, a struggling Assyrian army enlists the help of the Egyptians to take on Babylon. Pharaoh Necho of Egypt answers the call. King Josiah of Judah wishes to gain favor with the budding Babylonians, so he tries to block the Egyptians from joining the Assyrian army, but he's wiped out. We can read about that in 2 Kings 23, 2 Chronicles 35. Pharaoh Necho eventually joins with the Assyrians, but even together they're no match for Babylon. And in 605, at the Battle of Carchemish, which is one of the greatest battles of all of human history, the Egyptians are defeated by King Nebuchadnezzar of the Babylonians. King Nebuchadnezzar expands his territory southwest into Syria and encroaches on Israel. Meanwhile, Nebuchadnezzar's dad, Nabopolassar, has died in Babylon. So what happens when Daddy King dies and Nebuchadnezzar the son is far away? What does he have to do? He's got to go home to secure his power as the king. He doesn't want somebody else to take the crown. He wants it for himself, which is, fair. He is the prince at the time. So he runs back. So daddy's dead, and he's got to run back to Babylon. Well, guess where he's got to run through to get to Babylon? He's got to run through Pipsqueak Nation that we call Israel. And he's not happy for a lot of different reasons. Daddy's dead. There's all kinds of emotions running through him. He's mad at Israel. There's a Pipsqueak Nation. He sees somebody he can bully, and guess what? He does. So, after establishing himself after his father's death, Nebuchadnezzar returns to Jerusalem in 605. And it's at this time when Daniel and his friends are taken captive. So, he goes back to Jerusalem. He didn't have enough fun the first time because he was running through. But now he decides to come back and he's going to have some fun. He takes some captives back with him. Daniel's among this group. He returns. It's when he's going through that first time, as on his way through, he takes some captives, and Daniel's a part of that group. Okay, so now Daniel's going back to Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar comes back for a second time. There's some uprising, and that's what we read about earlier. There's an uprising. There's some political issues going on. The king of Israel wants to, look at me. Nebuchadnezzar goes back down a second time, roughs them up again, leaves them alone, sets up another puppet state of his own. A little while later, he's got to go back because there's another uprising. I don't know why these Jews they just never seem to get it, do they? Doesn't matter what's going on. The Jews never seem to get it. There's another uprising, and this time in 586, Nebuchadnezzar goes down, destroys it completely and entirely, and wipes out the whole thing. So in that first go-around, Daniel goes back. In the second go-around, Ezekiel goes back. The third time, they're wiped out. So that's what's going on. So 586 is the final time of Nebuchadnezzar going into Jerusalem. He wipes it out. It's within this political landscape of changing powers from the Assyrians to the Babylonians, the Battle of Carchemish. 3 times into Jerusalem, Nebuchadnezzar goes for different reasons, and captives are being taken. It's a very wild time. The final destruction of Israel as a nation. They're just wiped off the face of the earth at this time. They're gone. They're done. Nebuchadnezzar's had it with them. It's in this political landscape that we find Daniel. So imagine being Daniel. You've had your hometown wiped out. You're seeing all sorts of destruction and carnage being gone on. It's just terrible. I can't even begin to imagine, like, if Washington, D.C. just gets razed one day. It would be crazy. That's what Daniel got to witness. As you read, through the book of Lamentations, how many of you have read Lamentations? You ever wonder what Lamentations is about? Lamentations is about the 586 destruction of Jerusalem for that one last final time, and then it's gone. How utterly sad would that be? For hundreds of years, the nation of Israel has been with God on one level or another. Maybe even longer than that if you want to go back to the time of Joshua and Moses, way further back if you even want to go back to Abraham. They've been this nation under God. Now in 586, it's gone. You're no longer living under God's law or God's rule. You're now living in a foreign land with foreign gods and foreign people. Good luck. Good luck. The way I think of it is like if you ever start a new job and you feel so awkward. What are the rules? Where do I park? Who's going to like me? Who am I going to make friends with? What can I do? What's allowed? What's not allowed? And you're just kind of paralyzed. Like, I don't even know how to handle this. If If you've ever started a new job, that's kind of what it's like. Maybe you're moved to a new town. You don't know where the good restaurants are. You don't know where the churches are. You don't know where to get your car fixed. You don't have any idea what's going on anywhere. I mean, it's a whole new landscape. Maybe it's in a different state, and the states have different laws, and there's different, there's no income tax in Florida, but there is in Iowa, and everything's different. There's nothing the same. It's so different. This is what it's like to be Daniel. For about the first 16 years of his life, he's lived under God in Israel. And now he's living in Babylon. The game has changed. As one person would call it, the book of Daniel is all about living under Gentile rule. You've lived under God's rule for how long now as a nation? And now you're living under Gentile rule. What's it going to be like? How do you handle it? Who do you talk to? How do you do it? How does somebody who wants to live for God live in a world where they don't recognize that God? You ever felt that before in your life? You ever want to live for God, but then you go to work and everybody makes the weird jokes, they say the wrong things, they want to go to these parties, they want to do these things, and you're like, excuse me, I'm not going to do those things. And you're the only one standing when everybody else is sitting because you want to serve God. You don't want to drink what they're drinking. You don't want to take what they're taking. You don't want to say what they're saying. You don't want to joke about what they're joking with or watch what they're watching or do what they're doing because you want to stand for God. Nobody else is. How do you handle that? How do you do that? It's one thing when we're in church here and everybody loves God and we just kind of, have a great time. We go down to the fellowship hall and it's really great to have, carrying dinners and we just kind of have a great time. Everybody just loves the Lord and, that's great. What happens when you go out into the world and you try to do that with your company barbecue? It's not the same, is it, guys? It's not the same. They're going to bring in different things to drink than we're going to have to drink down there, aren't they? You going to drink that stuff or are you going to stand for God? What are you going to do? You have to make a choice. This is what it's like for Daniel to walk into Babylon. How does he handle it? Does he bend? Does he conform? Does he make excuses? What does he do? That's kind of the idea of Daniel. And we're going to get into all these things because there's all kinds of stories. I bet you if I asked you, name some stories that come to your mind when you think about Daniel. What would you say? Would you say the lion's den? How do you handle it when they say you can't pray? You're at that company barbecue and you're about to sit down to pray and everybody else just starts eating. Are you going to pray? What do? Do you pray when they tell you not to pray? When nobody else is doing it? What do you do? How do you handle it? How do you handle living under that Gentile rule? So we're going to talk about all those sorts of things. That's why you got to read Daniel. You got to see how does he handle all this stuff. So that's the place of the book. Where does it all fit into history and etc.? So the purpose of the book. Let's start to look at some key themes. So there's some key themes that are going to pervade and rise to the surface as you study this book. Some of the key themes includes God's sovereignty over peoples and nations. What does the word sovereignty mean? If you've been doing the Bible study, you'll get keyed in on what sovereignty means. Sovereignty is the idea of that God is in control of everything at all times and there's nobody that's going to tell him what to do. He is able to do anything he wants, whenever he wants, whyever he wants, however he wants, whatever. Because he's in control. He is sovereign. As you read Daniel, you're going to see God's sovereignty over peoples and nations. You're going to see who is the man behind the curtain. Who's the one pulling the strings? God's faithfulness to his covenant people is another key theme. Is God going to be faithful? So God has allowed the Babylonians to come in and completely destroy Israel. They're gone. They're done. And you're probably thinking to yourself, wow, must be a bad God to let his people die, go into captivity. What an awful, awful God. How could he ever do that to the people that he loved? I thought Israel was the apple of God's eye. And he let them go into captivity. He let Jerusalem be destroyed. That's not much of a loving God as far as I know. How does God handle his covenant people? What is God's faithfulness like to his covenant people? You read Daniel, you'll find out. What is it like? How does he handle these people? This book is also a great study for end time events. We're going to see a lot of prophecy in this book, a lot of prophecy. So the key verse of all the verses of Daniel, this is the one that I picked, 5:21. You can write this down in the bulletin, in your notes or whatever. Daniel 5:21 goes like this. The Most High God rules in the kingdom of men and appoints over it whomever he chooses. Read Daniel chapter 5 and you'll see I get goosebumps when I think about that verse. As I think about the context and what's going on in Daniel chapter 5. And to think that God is the one who sets up kingdoms, he sets up people, he sets up kings. Who is the one who's really behind the scenes, guys? Is it the king? Is it Nebuchadnezzar? Is it Jehoiakim? Who's in control? Is it Daniel? Is he in control? Who's the one moving the strings? Who's the one that's sovereign over all of history? Who is it? As you read Daniel, you'll find out exactly who it is. So the outline. There's a couple of major outlines given academically, but the one that I like the best, Pastor Rich always calls it a literary bifid, where it's two halves with a nice hinge in the middle, and they're two distinct things. It's a very Jewish way of writing. Like we've studied Ephesians before. Ephesians is also a literary bifid. You got the first 3 chapters, second 3 chapters. Very distinctly Jewish in that sort of thinking. So Daniel is no different. Chapters 1 through 6, the first 6 chapters, is God at work personally in the hearts and lives of people. So we're going to see some individual people like Daniel, Nebuchadnezzar, very individually focused, these first 6 chapters. Something's going to happen with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Very personal in chapter 2. All right, or chapter 3, I'm sorry. Nebuchadnezzar's dream in chapter 2, very personal to Nebuchadnezzar. Very specifically personal. And you're going to see, how does God work, move, and handle in a specific person's life? Can God work specifically in the heart and life of one person? And then chapters 7 through 12, God at work pervasively in the hearts and lives of populations. So we're going to move from individuals like Daniel, like Nebuchadnezzar, like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, or whatever his name is. And then we're going to move on. See, I can't say the names either. And we're going to move on. The second part, chapters 7 through 12, is God working pervasively in the hearts and lives of populations. Now we've moved from individuals to now populations. This group of people God is going to do something with. Do you think it's easier or harder for God to work with individuals or populations? Neither. He can do it both easily. In other words, is there anything too difficult in your life that God can't help you with? Is there anything so advanced that you're like, you know what, I don't even know if God could help me with this one? I hope you never feel that way. I hope you understand that God is able to meet you, to meet your need, to give you exactly what you need, no matter where you're at, no matter who you are, no matter when you live in history. It doesn't matter. God is able. He is the man behind the curtain, and he's the one pulling the strings. It's not you. It's not your spouse. It's not your kids. It's not your folks. God is the one who pulls the strings and who is control ultimately of everything that's going on. And he can do that. So finally, the theology of the book. We're just going to look at some things very specifically here. Like in theology proper, the study of God, we find over and over again the idea of God being in control over the events, not only in Daniel's life, but over every life. We see these ideas such as in chapter 1 and verse 2, where it says, "And then the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand." Who was it that was responsible for King Jehoiakim being given over? Was it Nebuchadnezzar and his mighty army? Even though he might think that, who's really the one who gave him over? It was God. Did you catch that the first time you read it? What about chapter 1 and verse 9? Now God had brought Daniel into the favor and goodwill of the chief of the eunuchs. Who was in control of making sure Daniel was brought into good favor with these guys? Was it Daniel himself, since he was so smart and so good looking? Is that why Daniel is brought into the favor of them? No, it's because God did it. God is the one pulling the strings. God is the one who's in charge. God is sovereign over the affairs of all of these things. And if God can do that with Daniel, just by note, he can do that with you. So in Christology, as you think about who Jesus is, as we think about Daniel chapter 7, Daniel's going to get a glimpse of what we call the Ancient of Days. And as you study that description of this Ancient of Days with the description of Jesus given in the book of Revelation, you're going to notice a lot of similarities. So that's interesting. Pneumatology is a study of the Holy Spirit in determining dreams and visions. The explanation of how that these are accomplished is because the Spirit of God is with Daniel. So that's cool. Chapter 4 and chapter 5, we're going to see some of those sorts of things. Angelology is a study of angels. Much is said of angels in Daniel. Daniel is one of the best places to study angels. Did you know that? If you're interested in angels, what do angels do? How do angels react? Tell me some stuff about angels. One of the best places to study angels is in the book of Daniel. We're going to be Michael, who's called a chief prince in chapter 10. Soteriology is the study of salvation. Salvation has always been by grace through faith in God and his promises. And we're going to see how Daniel is delivered through many troubles. Ecclesiology is a study of the church. Now, is the church in the book of Daniel? My scholars, is the church in the book of Daniel? No. No, it is not. This is one of those things. This is why we had the sermon from last week, so you're prepared for something like this. We cannot say that the builders are dumb for not having electrical conduits in the castle. Remember that? The church is not in Daniel. So we cannot be looking for the church. However, there are some things in Daniel chapter 9 that could give us some clues about some different things, and we'll get to Daniel chapter 9 when we get there. Eschatology is the study of end times, and much of Daniel is eschatological in its nature, especially chapters 9 through 12, and those will be some exciting chapters to study. You can take off your harnesses, you can take your helmet off, we're through. If you have any questions about Daniel in its scope or anything about it, the history of it, if you have any questions about it, because my hope, my prayer, my hope for you is that you'll read Daniel on your own at home. You've got to keep up with this. I'm telling you guys, if you thought this was a lot or you kind of left thinking, it ain't going to get any easier and it ain't going to get any better unless you're at home reading it and studying it for yourself. You know how I'm going to know who's reading it and studying it on their own? Guess how I'm going to know? I'm going to get asked questions. My thing's going to bing. I'm going to get messages on my phone. That's how I'm going to know who's studying this on their own. If I get 0, I'm going to assume nobody's read it, nobody's studying it, because you're going to have a question about it if you read it, I promise. I've studied this through 5 or 6 times now and being ready for this, and I still have questions, all right? If you think you're not going to have any questions, you will have questions. Please ask me, and that's how I'm going to know who's studying it when you're at home. Let's pray.